Hi, I am Stefano Dall'Ora. I was involved in the development of SQUID-3, the latest synth by Acoustica Audio. In this tour, we'll go through all the features available in this synth. Now, SQUID's looks can be deceiving. Behind its reassuring appearance as a classic subtractive monophonic synthesizer is a set of features that make it truly unique. For example, SQUID offers 15 different modulation sources that can be applied to more than 90 different destinations. It features also a sub-oscillator with 4 selectable waveforms, 2 distinct distortion sources that are extremely warm and musical, and a master filter that can be opened to its upper limit for an especially modern sound. Anyway, all of this would be of little or no value at all if, at its core, SQUID were not capable of producing a fat, captivating sound full of character. Actually, the shared feeling among all of us who worked on its creation was that we were dealing with a true musical instrument, one capable of fascinating and inspiring musicians, producers, and sound designers alike. So now let's go into detail and take a look at everything SQUID has to offer. This is the main screen with a panel providing virtually all of the available controls. Different sections are grouped into boxes. From left to right, here we have the output controls, the oscillators, the mixer, the filter. And there's also its relative drive control here for the distortion. Here we have the 2 envelope generators, the 2 modulation panels here on the right. And at the top of the panel we can see here 5 buttons, which I will talk about in a moment, along with some other global controls here, and on the top right, the effects section. At the bottom, in addition to the keyboard display, we have also a master output level, this fader here. And on the right here, a panel that summarizes the state of the whole quite complex modulation matrix. So let's go back to this first panel here, top left. For the first time in software produced by Acoustica Audio, we also have 4 sub-panels available that make sound creation and editing easier. Each of these sub-panels is focused on a specific section of the synth. So let's press this OSC button and start working on the page dedicated to the oscillators, which naturally have the important task of providing the raw sonic material of the synth. Here we have 4 audio sources available: oscillator 1 and 2, a sub-oscillator, and here a noise generator. The 2 main oscillators share a similar structure. Each one has an octave control here with 4 positions, from 16 to 10 feet. An output level control with clickable numeric indicator here. And an on-off switch. Naturally, whenever we change the position of a control here in any sub-panel, the same change is also immediately reflected on the main page. The wave control here is very interesting. Unlike what usually happens in most synthesizers, where oscillators have waveforms that are selected using buttons or rotary switches, here we have a continuous control. The output wave morphs smoothly from triangle to sawtooth, then square, and from there, as in any classic analog synthesizer, it reaches also pulse waveform, a rather narrow. So the interesting thing here is that this control, like almost every other control in SQUID, can be modulated by one of the many available sources, resulting in a much broader form of modulation than classic PWM, pulse width modulation. It's also worth highlighting the convenience of having a numeric representation of the waveform here. So, for instance, if we want exactly a pure sawtooth, we type 33 here, and here we go. Or with 67, we have a perfect square wave. As you can hear, we know even harmonics. Then we have the key sync button here that causes the waveform to be reset for every played note. In Oscillator 2, we have some additional controls. Frequency modifies the tuning of Oscillator 2 relative to Oscillator 1. Goes up by up to a perfect fifth above or down a fifth below. Bitrate is another distinctive feature of this synth. This control allows us to set a constant frequency difference between the two oscillators, regardless of pitch. This generates a beating between the two waves that remains constant for any note played. Finally, we have the hard sync button here, which forces Oscillator 2 to reset its waveform on each cycle of Oscillator 1. This is another classic feature of many vintage and modern analog synthesizers. The aggressive sounds it can generate are unmistakable. So, with no hard sync enabled, you can hear the second oscillator changing its frequency freely. But we enable hard sync. It's a classic sync sound for an analog synthesizer. The third sound source available here is the sub-oscillator. So let's switch it on. This oscillator is a powerful tool for creating massive sounds on earth-shaking basses. The sub-oscillator also has a lever control and the enable switch. And we have 4 waveforms available here. We can choose them with this button by pressing. It cycles through square, sine, sawtooth, and triangle. It's worth noting that this sub-oscillator always operates at a frequency that is exactly half that of Oscillator 1. So we can hear them together. Sub-oscillator always tracks oscillator number 1. Finally, we have a noise generator, a white noise generator actually, also equipped with level control and an on-off switch. Okay, I will discuss the other controls on this page later, but I will make 2 exceptions. I will briefly illustrate the Glissando control here, and then show you the paraphonic mode selector on the left. In the Glissando section, the 2 easiest controls to understand, of course, are the on-off button here, and the slider that sets the speed or time of the Glissando itself. Starting from the top, we have 3 buttons on the left that allow you to select which oscillators the Glissando will act on. So let's switch on the 2 oscillators at different octaves for clarity. We have the Glissando acting only on oscillator 1. We can have both oscillators, or just oscillator number 2. The 3 buttons on the top right select 3 different Glissando modes. The first, RTE, stands for rate, sets a constant rate Glissando, so it will take longer to glide between distant notes than between close ones. The second mode is TME, stands for time. This sets a constant time for any interval you play. So we play the same time as this and this. The third button, log, sets a logarithmic transition between the two pitches. Let's hear it. It's a fast transition at the beginning, and progressively it gets slower and slower as it approaches the target pitch. At the bottom, we have this legato button that causes the glissando to occur only when playing legato. So when playing staccato, conversely, no glissando will occur. I'm playing legato. I play staccato. Then again legato. The GAT, gated button, has a more subtle effect. When glissando is enabled, and you trigger it by playing, for example, a high note after a low one, and then release the key before reaching the correct pitch, the higher pitch, the glissando now is continuing its run, even if no note it's being played. So if I play the target note now again, we can immediately hear the correct pitch. But if we do the same thing and by first enable the gated button, now the glissando will stop. It will be frozen as it is now. And we continue only if you play the target note again. And finally, we come to the paraphonic mode control. Paraphony is a trick invented at a time when analog synthesizers were strictly monophonic. To overcome this limitation, designers found a way to extract the information needed to generate two distinct notes with two oscillators, which were then processed by a single filter and a single envelope. SQUID-3 brings this mode back in all of its intact charm, so we can enable paraphony. Actually, this would be more precisely be called duophony in this case. We can press the para mode button here, and at this point, okay, if we play just one note, nothing changes. But if we play two notes simultaneously, then the two oscillators produce two dissonant notes, two different pitches at the correct interval. The three buttons above set the note assignment logic. The first one, keyboard follow, disconnects completely oscillator 2 from keyboard control. So now, oscillator 2, you can hear it, it's fixed. In this case, it's fixed on the C note. Of course, we can change this fixed note by adjusting it with a frequency control. We can have an F or whatever we like. The second button is high, and that means that the higher notes of the two is assigned to oscillator 2. Let's say that these three buttons here always refer to oscillator 2. So oscillator 2 now is playing the higher part. And the lower part is played, of course, by oscillator 1. The third button, low, of course, it's the other way around. Here we have the higher part played by oscillator 1 and the lower by oscillator 2. With this, we conclude for now the description of the functions related to the oscillator page. I realize there must be a lot of curiosity about the rather intriguing large red panel on the far right. But please be patient a little longer. We will get there soon. The second subpanel we examine is the one that groups the controls related to the mixer and the filter. This part of SQUID-3 is, in my opinion, one of its greatest strengths. In fact, here, in addition to shaping the sound with the classic low-pass filter, we can also introduce various forms of non-linearity with a wide range of tonal colors, yet always maintaining an incredibly warm and fat sound. It would be impossible here to feel nostalgic for the analog world. On this page, we can see the 4 level controls and their related switches for the 2 oscillators, the sub-oscillator and the noise generator. We have just examined those controls. In the center, orange panel of the low-pass filter immediately stands out. It's certainly the star of this panel. But as we shall see, there's also good reason to have the level controls here. If you remember, on the main page in the mixer, there was a 5th level control called return. You can see it here in the lower part of the mixer panel. We can also find it on this page right here. This control allows the output signal of the mixer before entering the filter to be routed back to another input of the mixer itself, thus creating feedback. As always happens, positive feedback, in addition to increasing the signal beyond normally allowed levels, generates instability and various system states that are always difficult to predict. In a word, we have distortion and really at its extreme sonic chaos. Let's hear how a triangular wave, which is rather dark by nature, can be transformed into something completely different. And if we push this control to its upper limit, there we have chaos. It's a matter of balancing the output of oscillator 1 this fader. We can just play on the edge of sonic chaos. This is not the only source of non-linearity available in SQUID-3. Now let's talk about the low-pass filter. In the history of classic analog synthesizers, the filter has always rightly been considered the element that most defines the sound of the entire machine. It's an element that, despite performing a fairly simple function, manages to color the sound in a very various way, depending on how it was designed and the technology used. In the case of SQUID-3, the first adjective that comes to my mind to describe the filter is just powerful. The main control is the fader that adjusts the filter cutoff frequency, of course, from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. To its right, the resonance control emphasizes the response near the cutoff frequency. Classic analog sound. We can push the resonance control up to the point of self-oscillation by the filter. We can switch off the oscillator altogether and the filter will oscillate nevertheless. We have four slopes available for this filter, and we can choose them with these buttons here. Starting from 6 dB per octave. This filter is also called a one-pole filter. To 12, 18, up to 24 dB per octave, which is the steepest slope. Each of these modes has a different sound, of course, and so it offers a large sonic palette. And there's another thing to be noted, that the filter always resonates also whatever slope we choose. We talked about the usefulness of having the mixer level controls on this page. There's a reason for that. The filter is actually designed so that it gives progressive distortion as the input level increases. So we can hear, for instance, how two triangular waves at different frequencies, it's a fifth interval, these waves create a slight already, the level controls are set at halfway now for both of the oscillators, yet we can hear some slight intermodulation between the two waves. Even more so if we push the levels up. This is just the filter distorting. Then, if we move the drive control here on the left of the filter, we can further increase this distortion. This control actually does a number of things behind the scenes. Of course, it also raises the input level into the filter, but it changes also some internal parameters into the filter and after it. So the distortion is quite complex, it's very interesting, very musical and warm. Let's see, for instance, the good old triangle wave, how it is transformed also. It sounds almost like a sine, distorted sine. This control smooths out all the corners of the wave. It's very gradual, very progressive, and very musical. The fader at the bottom right of the orange panel, named key track, adjusts how much influence the pitch of the played note has on the cutoff frequency of the filter. So for clarity, let's switch off the oscillator and increase the resonance of the filter and set the filter to a frequency we can hear. So now the filter is self-oscillating, but whichever note I play, nothing changes, of course. Then if I gradually move this fader and I reach the 1-to-1 mark, just halfway, so I can play the filter. And the filter becomes a kind of an additional oscillator with a slightly distorted sine wave. If we push the fader, the key track fader, to the maximum, here we have a 2-to-1 ratio between the note played and the filter frequency. That means that for every semitone that I play on the keyboard, we will hear a whole tone interval. Now I'm playing a chromatic scale, and we hear a whole tone scale. The control to its left, e.g. depth, determines how and how much the first envelope generator, the upper one, can modify the filter frequency, both in the positive and in negative direction. Or there are two envelope generators available. By default, the upper one controls the filter and the lower one controls the amplifier, that is, the final output signal level of the synth. The two generators are practically identical, so it will be sufficient to analyze just one of them. So the envelope generator in SQUID-3, from now on we could call it EG for convenience, has a classic ADSR structure: attack, decay, sustain, release. The attack phase starts when a note is played. Let's hear it on the filter. The time it takes to reach the maximum level is set by the attack control. The decay control adjusts the transition time from the maximum level just reached to the level set by the sustain control. In this case, we have the sustain at 0. So we have first attack, then decay to 0. Let's close the filter a bit and raise the action of the envelope on the filter. With the sustain control, we raise, of course, the level, the stable level that is reached, holding the note on. Then we have the release phase, and this control determines the time it takes for the sound to fade out once the key is released. Or in this case, actually, the time it takes for the filter to close, because we are acting on the filter with this envelope. And of course, it goes the same for the amp envelope below, but everything now is related to the amplitude of the sound. By the way, we can follow the evolution of each envelope in real time by watching the red dots here in the two graphs on the right. So, except for sustain, which sets a level, the other three controls set times that range from a fraction of a millisecond, 0.1 millisecond, to up to 10 seconds. It's quite a long time, actually. So far, everything is quite standard, except perhaps for the fact that the very fast times of these EGs are capable of producing extremely snappy sounds when needed. Very, very fast attacks. This row of controls on the right opens up further possibilities. From left to right, we have a delay control, which delays the start of the envelope cycle relative to the start of the note. Followed by hold, which keeps the envelope at its maximum level for the desired time at the end of the attack phase, before then continuing with decay. The third control sets the influence of note dynamics on the envelope amplitude. So in this case, the filter. The higher the velocity of the note, so the dynamics of the note, the higher the level of the envelope. Again, the same goes for the amplitude. So we have a low velocity of the note and low amplitude level, and vice versa. So we have the dynamics here, both for filter and amplitude, or whatever else we later decide to modulate with these envelopes, actually. The last control is key track, which gradually shortens all envelope times as you move up the keyboard range. Let's hear it on the amplitude. Let's first set an envelope. Okay, now we have the same times all over the keyboard, of course. But if we raise this control, then we have longer times here and progressively shorter times going up on the keyboard. The row of 6 buttons below the faders also allows other interesting combinations. Normally, when playing legato, both envelopes do not restart, but remain in whatever state they were previously in. I'm playing staccato, now I'm playing legato. Okay. By enabling retrig button, we can make the envelope restart on every new note, even when playing legato. Reset causes the envelope to restart from zero every time, rather than from the level it has reached at that precise moment. Let's see, if we set quite long times with for instance, attack and release. Okay, let's focus on the filter. If I play again the same note, you can hear that the envelope restarts from wherever it is at that moment. But if I enable reset, each time the envelope is forced to restart from zero. Then we have sync button that synchronizes the envelope with the master clock, which we will talk about shortly. The menu next to the button selects the type of musical division applied relative to the base clock. Here we have 21 options, ranging from the longer values, such as 4 whole notes, all the way down to 1/64th note triplet. Cycle is also interesting. It puts the envelope into a loop, so we get a continuous repetition of the envelope itself. The cycle duration depends on the sum of the attack, decay, and release times. So with all controls set at their maximum, and keeping in mind that we have also the delay and hold controls into this picture, we can reach a cycle that lasts about 50 seconds in total. The last two buttons are perhaps the easiest to understand. Hold simply locks the envelope in its sustain phase. Now, if I leave the note, just goes on. Exponential curve changes the shape of the attack curve while leaving its time unchanged. So when we enable it, the curve rises faster at the beginning and then slows down towards the end. This is normal attack curve. And this is the exponential one. This is the modulation panel in all its intimidating power. As in the other sub-panels, here too we have, for convenience, some controls already seen on other screens, such as oscillators and filter, resonance on the left. In reality, the heart of the action here takes place in the two central big panels, and in the smaller, also in the smaller purple boxes here on the right. First of all, we have two low-frequency oscillators, here LFO for short, which would more accurately be described as modulation buses 1 and 2, each of which can generate a signal from different sources. We can choose these sources from a list here of 66 different waveforms. We have the same good old continuous waveforms, such as triangle, sawtooth, ramp. We have pulse waveform as well. We have this one, this is a sample and hold, sample noise, and lots of other cyclic waveforms such as trapezoid, also stepped waveforms, different with lots of options here. The frequency of this LFO is adjusted with the rate control. The available range goes from 0.1 Hertz, which is quite a long time because it's one cycle roughly every 10 seconds. Quite a slow one, up to 100 Hertz, which is an unusually high value actually for an LFO. But it doesn't end there. There's one entry here in the first menu, the entry number 5, prog. This entry, this option refers to the menu just immediately below, where we find a more extensive list of sources, different sources, some of which are actually independent of the LFO rate, such as we have a filter envelope, amplitude envelope, and also this number 7 constant, which is very useful because it's a fixed maximum value that can be really handy in several occasions. So let's stay here in the upper part of the panel. We have a graph showing the waveform that we have selected. And we have these 3 buttons here. The first button multiplies the LFO frequency by a factor of 10. This pushes the upper limit to 1 kHz, which is quite high. We can reach FM territories here. The second button, Sync, synchronizes the LFO rate to the master clock. Remember, we still have some unfinished business here. We choose the clock division ratio here from this menu. We have the same 21 options already seen for the EG synchronization, from 4 whole notes to 1 64th note triplet. Then we have also a key sync button. This resets the LFO every time we play a note. And finally, we have also a swing button, which enables the well-known function that gradually delays the offbeats of the chosen division. Finally, still in the upper section, there's the fader that sets the key tracking of the LFO frequency. As with the equivalent control in the filter section, it goes from no effect at the minimum to a 1-to-1 ratio here in the middle. So the frequency doubles for each octave interval on the keyboard, up to the double 2-to-1 ratio. This control can be extremely useful because we can use it to create pitched modulations, actually. They can really sound almost like FM synthesis. Each of the 2 modulation buses passes through the controllers section. Let's keep in mind that we are examining only the first bus, but we actually have 2 identical, completely independent ones available. We have 4 controllers at our disposal. Each of the 2 modulation buses then passes through the controllers section. Let's keep in mind that we are analyzing only the first bus, but we actually have 2 identical and completely independent ones available. Here we have 4 controllers at our disposal. Each of them can regulate the amount of modulation applied to the chosen destination. The first 3 controllers are fixed: wheel, velocity, and aftertouch. The fourth one, however, has 8 freely assignable options, including the 2 envelopes, and the brake controller here. These 4 sliders work in a particular way. At first they may create a bit of confusion, but after a short time the ergonomics become very apparent. This is a good point to use a practical example. So with all these 4 sliders in their central position, 0 position here, the modulation signal passes unchanged to the destination. Okay. Now, if I move the first slider wheel to the maximum, now I'm diverting all the modulation through the modulation wheel. So the wheel now fully controls the modulation amount. With the wheel at 0, now I don't have any modulation, which I used to have here. Wheel at maximum on the controller section. Now the actual wheel is at 0, no modulation. And now the wheel controls the modulation. We can think of these controls like almost like panels. At the center, the signal passes directly, while at the 2 extremes, we gradually divert the modulation through the respective controllers. This diversion can be positive or, on the lower half of the slider's travel, negative. In this second case, always continuing with the example with the wheel, the modulation remains active, like from 0 to -5. Nothing changes here. But if I move the wheel, now I can gradually turn off the modulation. We can combine different settings for the 4 sliders. So once again, the possible combinations are truly endless. In the lower part of the panel, we finally reach the selection of modulation destinations. Once more, 2 of the 3 available controls have fixed assignments. The first knob sends modulation to the oscillator's pitch. Negative to the left and positive to the right. Now we must remember that not all modulation sources are symmetrical around 0. The pulse waveform, for instance, is only positive, so it takes only positive values. It's a useful feature if you want to use this waveform to generate trills above or below the pitch. Here we can also choose if we apply this modulation to both oscillators. Here we can choose whether the modulation affects only the first oscillator. Now we're hearing 2 oscillators together. And now I'm modulating oscillator number 1, or both of them, or just a second. The second control sets the amount of modulation sent to the filter. The third control can be assigned to as many as 92 different destinations, plus an initial off position. Practically every function in SQUID-3 can be modulated, from LFO rate to the level of each sound source, to distortion amount, to Glissando, all the way down to the last parameters of the 2 EGs. At this point, the enormous potential of this extensive modulation matrix becomes very clear. A small example now, among millions possible. Let's set both waveforms in the LFOs to pulse and adjust their effect on oscillator's pitch so as to generate tonal intervals. Let's have the first one to modulate the pitch to a perfect fifth, and the second one to a minor third, and a faster rate as well. Let's combine the two modulation buses. And already here we have a kind of a random modulation, rather unpredictable. But we can go further than this. If we modulate the rate of LFO2 with the signal from LFO1 and the other way around, let's LFO2 modulate the rate of LFO1, we can have a cross modulation between the two LFOs. And this produces a chaotic behavior that is really unpredictable and never repeats itself. Never the same rhythmic pattern. And from this point on, we can really add, we can have fun here. Let's switch on oscillator number 2 as well. And maybe let's modulate number 2 only with bus number 2. And then say we raise the key tracking of the two LFOs, so we have a slower modulation here and a faster one here. And then let's go on the main page and maybe add some distortion, and maybe why not some sub-oscillator as well. And let's have also a sneak preview of the effects section. Let's put some delay on this sound. But that's not all. SQUID-3 offers 6 more modulation possibilities. In particular, of the 6 purple boxes here on the right, we have the odd-numbered ones, number 3, 5, and 7, that receive their modulation source from bus number 1. And the even ones, 4, 6, and 8, receive it from bus 2. So let's start with the 3 menus we have here. On the top, the first one selects the source of modulation. We can have the same source as bus 1 or sample noise, filter EG, amp EG, constant again. The middle menu works together with the slider next to it. Here we select a controller for this modulation. Again, we have the usual suspects: wheel, velocity, breath controller. And this controller, however, acts only if we allow it via the slider. So, with the slider at 0, no modulation occurs. Moving the slider toward the positive values at the top or negative at the bottom gradually enables the action of the selected controller. Finally, the lower menu selects one of the 92 possible destinations that we already know. Here I've selected the waveform of oscillator 1, and I am using the wheel as a controller for this modulation. So the slider is at its central position, and I move the wheel. I'm moving the wheel now, but no modulation occurs anyway. If I push the slider to its maximum now, as you can hear, the modulation wheel can control the amount of modulation. These 6 additional modulation channels work in parallel in groups of 3, the odd ones for bus 1 and the even ones on bus 2, making it possible to sum very different modulations in an infinite number of combinations. To conclude, this modulation section is as anticipated, very, very complex. However, we should keep in mind that in normal use of the synth, the most commonly used parameters are easily accessible. We can think of this immense modulation matrix as an additional possibility behind the door we open only when we need it. But in everyday use of SQUID-3, all the classic synth parameters are really conveniently within easy reach, so we won't find any problems, any kind of problem using them. Having emerged almost unscathed from the modulation page, let's now refresh ourselves with the effects page before ending with the final global controls on the main page. Let me say one thing first. In many virtual synths, effects are sometimes indispensable to make the digitally generated sounds at least somewhat interesting. Otherwise, they can feel cold and predictable in a way. This is absolutely not the case with this synth. Like any respectable analog synthesizer, the sounds produced by SQUID-3 already have such abundant personality, power, musicality as well, that you certainly won't feel the need for additional embellishments. I know this may sound like classic marketing hype, but you'll be able to verify it for yourself. As with all Acoustica products, SQUID-3 can be downloaded from the Aquarius platform in a fully functional 30-day trial version. Now, back to the effects. Over the years, Acoustica has produced dozens of high-quality audio processors, and it would have been a shame to waste this opportunity. You can think of this page as a collection of spices that you may choose to add to a dish that is already excellent on its own. Here we have 5 effects at our disposal, each of which can be enabled individually and bypassed globally using the All Effects On button. The number identifying each effect also indicates its fixed position in the processing chain. So let's begin with number 1, the equalizer. Here we have 5 bands available. The 2 outer ones are a low shelf, let's switch it on, a low shelf and a high shelf, while the 3 central bands are bell filters. The gain of each band is controlled by these 5 faders. The operating frequency of each of the 5 bands can be changed by horizontally dragging its corresponding white dot. We can also change the gain from here. By pressing the white button on the left below the power switch, you can activate the spectrum equalizer for the output signal. Next comes the saturation stage. In addition to the power switch, we have a menu for selecting the distortion model. The choice is very extensive and includes, among others, vacuum tube stages, guitar pedals, clippers, etc. The 3 sliders allow you to control, first the far right, the mix, the ratio between the distorted and the original signal. And then we have the shape in the middle, which changes the harmonic content of the distortion. And the drive signal, that you can hear, we can adjust. Actually, we are adjusting the input level of the signal here. At this point, it's worth mentioning also that the slider called FX Trim, located at the far left on the white panel, plays a very important role, especially with the saturator. This control adjusts the input level feeding the entire effects chain. So, raising it allows you to easily increase the amount of distortion generated by the saturation stage. Let's change the model. You can hear they're very different from one another. The third effect is a stereo chorus, inspired by a famous unit found on a Japanese synthesizer from the early 80s. The mix fader once again controls the amount of processed signal relative to the original. The model menu replicates the three typical modes of this effect, which originally had only two buttons. So type 1 and type 2. As you can hear, the second mode provides a faster modulation than the first. For the third option, you will press both buttons simultaneously, resulting in a rather fast modulation and a reduction to a monophonic output. 1, 2, 1 plus 2. The fourth effect is a delay featuring a number of models of both analog and digital processors. The frequency response and distortion characteristics vary significantly from one model to another, and even the way the effect reacts to changes in delay time adapts to the emulated device. So, with analog models, you'll experience a glissando effect when changing the time. Whereas digital models will switch instantly. The delay time, controlled by the first knob, is always synchronized to the host BPM. We have different subdivisions here. Or. You can select the value of these subdivisions by clicking on the blue display and selecting straight values or triplet, quintuplet, septuplet, or dotted values. So the ping pong button also is interesting. That makes the delayed signal bounce from one channel to the other, creating an effective stereo widening. Feedback is a classic control that feeds the delayed signal back into the effect. So we have, and we can hear the ping pong setting here. Otherwise we have a mono effect, and we go with a stereo of ping pong mode. And once again, at the end, we have the mix control for balancing the processed and dry signals. The last effect in the chain is the reverb. There's a pre-delay control and the size parameter, which lengthens the reverb time. You can select the algorithm by clicking on the button with the downward pointing white arrow. The reverbs are grouped into 11 categories. From 0 to 8, we have increasingly shorter reverb types. Category 9 contains reverse plates, and category 10 includes shimmer effects sourced from Acoustica Audio's recent Cadet plugin. And finally, of course, we have again the essential mix control. Finally, we have also a dark button, which of course darkens the sound. of the reverb. To finish this walkthrough, let's take a look at a few functions found on the main page. In the output section on the left, at the top we find the hold button, equivalent to the classic MIDI CC64 sustain pedal. Jumping down to the lower left corner, we find the note priority selector, which can be set to last, higher note, or low note priority. This selector allows you also to choose polyphonic mode. The number of available voices can be set using the menu above it. We have a rotary volume control here, which is pre-effect set, and a global tuning control at the bottom. Actually, the reason why we are jumping around in this presentation is that I wanted to leave the central master clock section for last, as we already hinted at it several times now. The master clock is a clock generator used by various modules inside SQUID-3. If sync is enabled in the LFO, in the envelope generator, or in the Arpeggiator, for instance, which we'll discuss in a moment anyway, their behavior will follow this clock and selected subdivision. The master frequency control adjusts the speed of the master clock and therefore affects all modules in sync mode. The Do button to its left synchronizes the master clock to the host application and simultaneously disables the master frequency knob. In this panel, we also find the transpose menu, which shifts the pitch up or down by 2 octaves. So let's talk about the Arpeggiator now. Of course, it's enabled via the on button. Rate controls its internal clock, and gate adjusts the on-off ratio of each note, shorter and longer. The range menu here expands the number of octaves played by the Arpeggiator, up to 2 octaves above or below. The upward range options are 0, no extra octave, 1, plus 1 octave, 2, plus 2 octaves, or this setting called 0 plus 2, which goes like 0, 1, 2, 1. And the same options are mirrored downwards. So we have -1, -2, -0, 2. Pattern, the other menu here, changes the order in which notes are played. There are 4 options here: ascending, descending, played order, the order in which I play notes, and random finally. Alt/dir button, this button here, plays an inverted copy of the arpeggio every other cycle. So for instance, C-E-G, which I am playing now, becomes C-E-G-E. Back and forth. The end button works only when Alt/dir is also selected and repeats the first and last notes of the pattern. So C-E-G becomes C-E-G, G-E-C. first and last notes are repeated. Step 1, reset, this button here, sends a reset signal at the beginning of each new arpeggio cycle. This can reset the LFOs or oscillators, provided they have their respective key sync buttons enabled. The menu below this group of buttons subdivides the rate clock according to the same musical values, the same values found in previous menus such as modulation, e.g. sections. Here we have 16th notes, 8 notes, half notes. Of course, always relative to the setting of the rate control. Pressing sync locks the arpeggiator to the master clock. In this condition, of course, master frequency control sets the general speed, but this subdivision menu becomes inactive and it's replaced by the rate control, which sets now the subdivision relative to the master frequency control. When both sync and do are enabled, then the arpeggiator syncs to the host BPM and rate becomes inactive again. Sorry. And the subdivision is again determined by this menu. Let's move to the last missing panel now. The one at the top, just to the right of the sub-panel selector. These controls are also crucial for shaping the final tone. At the top, we can activate Super Stereo. This control has appeared in all acoustic audio synths so far and performs a very simple action. It duplicates the synth in its current state. This alone greatly enhances the sound, especially when raising the spread control, which widens the stereo field between the two synth copies. Now I activate Super Stereo and raise the spread. Acoustica Audio's analog circuit emulation is so accurate that just as with real analog hardware, even with identical settings, you will never experience phase cancellations, flanging, or comb filtering. All the tiny real-time variations produced in the analog electronics by thermal drift and aging create highly decorrelated signals. Much like a section of violins in an orchestra, everyone is playing the same part, but small differences between the instruments create that wonderful sense of sonic mass. The edge control determines the amount of analog imperfection, simulating the natural aging of electronic components. We also have the detune slider, which further separates the pitch of the two synth layers in the Super Stereo. This panel also includes the single LFO button, which, in polyphonic mode, determines whether the voices are modulated by a single shared LFO or by individual per voice LFOs. Next is the effects trim we already encountered in the effects page, and the quality selector ranging from Eco to Giga in 4 steps. Now, I assure you, Squid sounds fantastic even in Eco mode, believe me. The lock icon allows you to freeze this selection so it does not change when switching presets. At the top we find Global MIDI Learn, which pairs a parameter with the first incoming MIDI CC message and saves it to a global reference file. And local MIDI learn, which works the same way but stores the mapping only within the current preset. We're not quite done yet. I left for last the red panel we saw on the Oscillator page. This control is accessible only from here, has a bold, enigmatic and rather difficult name for a non-native English speaker, Berserker. Yet its purpose is simple. SQUID has an internal low-pass filter centered around 9-10 kHz, necessary to faithfully reproduce the character of classic analog synthesizers. This fader simply raises the cutoff frequency of that filter, unlocking the full bandwidth produced by SQUID's engine. You can think of it as a time travel selector from the 70s at the bottom to the full frequency range typical of modern productions at the top. Now, you can unlock the power. The green light is shining. We can hear the difference. Just unlock the power, in case you didn't feel like you had enough already. We have finally reached the end of this long journey through all the functions and features that make SQUID-3 such a powerful, versatile and distinctive synthesizer.